Humans are getting heavier, not gradually, rapidly. Obesity rates have exploded in the last decade, and most people think that the worst part about this is how it looks. Clothes fit differently, you feel less confident, you hate what you see in the mirror. Now, that's particularly pertaining to subcutaneous fat, which is this layer of fat you can pinch underneath the skin. But there's a far more dangerous type of fat known as visceral fat. Visceral fat is this fat that sits deep inside your abdomen and surrounds your viscera, which is your liver, pancreas, intestines, and so on. You can't see it directly in the mirror, but it changes what is happening inside your body. There's actually evidence that this fat functions almost like an endocrine organ, secreting hormones with significant downstream implications. It releases cytokines, which trigger low-level inflammation, a risk factor for heart disease, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and other chronic conditions. Now, here's the funny thing. There's evidence to suggest that total body weight loss does not necessarily reflect changes in your visceral adiposity and may actually be a poor marker when evaluating the benefit of these interventions. So, in other words, even if you lose weight, you might not be losing the right type of weight that specifically targets this visceral fat. So in this video, I'm going to give you a complete guide on how to drop this weight based on the current evidence. Let's start with diet. Now, for subcutaneous belly fat, there isn't a single food that directly increases it. It largely reflects your overall energy balance. Sustained caloric surplus leads to subcutaneous fat storage. But visceral fat doesn't behave the same way. Two individuals that are consuming virtually identical calories can have very different amounts of visceral fat, depending on their dietary composition. So it's not just how much you eat, it's what you eat. I want to first bring your attention to this 2014 experiment where 39 young and normal weight individuals were overfed muffins. They were higher in either saturated fatty acids such as palm oil or unsaturated fatty acids for a total of 7 weeks. Now, besides from fat quality, these muffins were virtually identical. It was a robust trial, double-blinded, randomized, placebo-controlled, and their visceral fat was assessed using an MRI 1.5 Tesla scanner. Despite gaining a similar amount of weight, the saturated fat group accumulated nearly twice as much visceral fat. The polyunsaturated fat group, on the other hand, gained almost 3 times as much lean mass and significantly less liver and visceral fat. Same calories, completely different fat distribution. So how much saturated fat can you have? Well, sources such as the American Heart Association recommend that approximately 6% of your total calories in a day can come from saturated fat. For the average person who's on around 2,000 calories a day, 6% would be 120 calories, which is around 13 grams of saturated fat. On the left, I have a list of foods high in saturated fat that you should avoid or minimize, and on my right is foods that are high in this preferable fat source, polyunsaturated fatty acids. Next, we have this other interesting study that was published in the BMC Medicine Journal that assessed the impacts of the effect of a high polyphenol Mediterranean diet on visceral fat adiposity. Now, in this study, there were 3 groups. One was your generic healthy dietary guidelines diet. Second was the Mediterranean diet. And third, we had a specific green Mediterranean diet, which I'm going to go into in a bit more detail now. So now, both of these Mediterranean diets had approximately 28 grams of walnuts per day, which is high in these polyunsaturated fatty acids. But this green med group further consumed green tea, around 3 to 4 cups a day, and they had this Wolfia globosa green shake, which supposedly has a high number of polyphenols and reduced their red meat intake. Subsequently, MRI was used to assess the visceral fat adiposity. Although the diets reached similar weight loss and reduction in waist circumference, the amount of visceral fat loss in the green Mediterranean diet was almost double, and this difference was statistically significant. The underlying mechanism by which this might be occurring may have to do with these compounds in green tea known as catechins. These are flavonoid polyphenols which act as antioxidants and essentially reduce inflammation within the body. In fact, there was an additional double-blinded placebo-controlled randomized trial that specifically showed Catechin-enhanced green tea just for 12 weeks showed a significant reduction in visceral fat in adults. Now, if you look at the data, obviously there's a huge amount of standard deviation, but on average, the visceral fat lost in the control group was negative 0.6, whereas in the cases, it was negative 9.5, which is a massive difference. All right, now that you have dialed into the right foods, it's time to go to exercise. Now, interestingly, there's this systematic review and meta-analysis which shows that even though diet has a larger effect on your total body weight loss, as a general rule, exercise has more of an effect in reducing your visceral fat levels. But you must be making sure that you're doing the right type of exercise because not all exercise is created equal. So what type of exercise is most beneficial in reducing your visceral fat? Well, here we have another meta-analysis of randomized control trials demonstrating a significant effect of aerobic exercise on reducing your visceral fat that was statistically significant, and yet resistance training had no significant effect. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying don't lift weights. Resistance training is excellent for building and preserving muscle, especially when you're losing weight. It improves strength, metabolic health, and overall function. But when it comes to visceral fat specifically, aerobic exercise seems to have an edge. And I think that's very important for me. I love going to the gym and working out, and sometimes I put cardio to the very end or don't give it as much importance. But this has kind of motivated me that I need to push myself aerobically as well. And so our next question is now, what type of cardio works best in burning your visceral fat? So there was a meta-analysis that actually compared your traditional steady state cardio, which is running, cycling, or swimming, with this high intensity interval training. And what that involves is this short bursts of intense effort followed by a long recovery period. And what's interesting is that HIIT actually was superior in many ways. It improved cardiorespiratory fitness, total cholesterol, and fasting blood glucose to a greater degree than your traditional aerobic exercise. But when it came specifically to reducing visceral fat, it was not superior to just your moderate intensity cardio. So the takeaway isn't that you need brutal intervals, it's that consistent aerobic activity matters. And this is actually a great result because it gives you flexibility to do what you like. You don't need to obsess over the perfect type of cardio. If you prefer jogging or cycling, then do that. If you enjoy HIIT, that works too. The point is you need to be consistent. Now, in a way, HIIT might be more efficient if you're short on time because it can be done quicker, but in terms of visceral fat reduction, both approaches get the job done. So just pick the one that you think you stick to. If you really want to dig into the data, there might be a slight advantage of running over cycling, but honestly, we're just splitting hairs at this point. Consistency beats the perfect plan every time because at the end of the day, the more you do, the better the results. And I'm not just saying that out of thin air. In fact, I have another meta-analysis to show you. And this meta-analysis specifically showed a dose-dependent effect of exercise on reducing visceral fat in overweight and obese adults. Even caloric restriction or dieting did not have this dose-response relationship. All right, I hope this was helpful. Stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next video.